it's Heath here from pickinglessons.com. In this guitar lesson, we're going to take a look at a fingerstyle arrangement of this really pretty tune, Colonel John Irwin. It's a great O'Carolan tune, very lovely melody. We're playing in drop D tuning and this arrangement is in the key of D. Now in a moment, we're going to take a look at the first section of this tune. So we'll look at part A together. We'll break that down. But if you head to pickinglessons.com, you've got to get yourself a copy of the chart we're working from, which has all your left hand position markings in there. We'll talk about the right hand as we start to work through this lesson. You'll also find a play along track there that you can download in the members section, and also part 2 of this lesson as well. pickinglessons.com. Okay, so let's start with a slow play through part A, and then we'll break it down and look at the techniques we need to play this tune. 1 and 2 and Okay, so there's part A of the tune, so 8 measures there with a repeat, same for part B when we get to that. Now, we're in drop D tuning, so string 6 there is tuned down to a D, otherwise we're in standard for the rest, so our D chord. It's a nice way of just checking your tuning overall there in drop D. Now, this arrangement is actually quite tricky. It's certainly more advanced. So the left hand positions that we need for the melody plus the accompaniment you need a pretty good left hand position. One thing I'll just mention, I'm on a nylon string. I thought that really suited this tune, the nylon string guitar tone. You could play it on a steel string, that's fine. What you do need to watch though is your hand position. You're really nice and low with the wrist. Some of these chords you'll see as we hit, even in the first measure, some of these chords are quite hard. And if you're playing with your thumb up, even on a steel string, you'll find that that hand position doesn't allow for these big stretches that we do need. All right, so our time signature for this one also is Sin 6/8. It's an air, so it's rather slow. So it's not played too fast. You have a look for some versions to listen to. You'll notice that some of them are slower, some will pick it up a little bit, but I would sort of suggest on the slower side. And our rhythm structure, we have some similar rhythms as we go through, so we'll look at those when we get to them. Now that pickup note, that comes in on that 6/8 note as we count in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the first beat. Now our hand position for this first chord, pretty straightforward. So left hand is pretty cool. Now what I'll mention about the right hand, when you're looking at the music, notice the lower notes, we're always going to play with the thumb. And if you look at the standard notation, the lower voice is always the note that has the stem moving down, that's the thumb. The other notes are the melody on top with the stem pointing up, that's the upper voice, so that's going to be with our fingers. Pretty much with this melody, just approach it as an alternating index middle. That works really well. You could play some rest stroke or some free stroke, and a very quick difference between the two. A rest stroke is where that finger will come through the string and basically come to rest on the string above. And it gives you a nice full sounding note. So that's great, and that works for this first measure, for example. So that works really nicely, all on that second string, nice full sounding melody, remembering that our melody wants to be really clear within the arrangement and not disappear behind those low notes, particularly when we play the melody on a lower string. So that was the rest stroke technique. Now, the free stroke technique is a technique where you just basically play the string and the finger will follow through just in a movement, something like that. So we're not coming to rest on the adjacent string, we're just following through away. So free stroke and rest stroke. So either is okay. I found a combination of those techniques as I went through sort of suited different parts. You may prefer to stick one over the other. A good exercise if you're not familiar with either of those is the rest stroke. You could just go 2 fingers, index middle on one string. Just get used to pulling through the string nice and evenly, nice and even volume and tone. And then the same for a free stroke. So I find the rest stroke a little bit warmer in tone, perhaps a little louder than the free stroke, but you do want them as close as possible, but they will be a little bit different. Okay, let's move through this tune. So that first measure, little finger over to that low G note. And this is the hand position I was mentioning before. Like, this is really tricky. So if you're too high up, you're going to hit some notes and potentially block some strings. So you really need to work on this position down. So the thumb's quite low behind the neck. Your wrist is coming forward so that you can open up those fingers and then arch over the top of the strings that are underneath the hand position there. Measure 2. What we're trying to do as we play through is let those notes ring for as long as possible until you change to the next chord. So a good example here, using little finger on the F sharp as we come in on the B minor chord, because we've come out of this A position with a C sharp on the lower inversion. And our third finger's busy. We want to leave it there though, so we bring in the little finger to catch the next chord. So we're trying to bring notes in really close together and not separate them, because if you use your third finger on the B minor, you'll have to lift off the C sharp a little bit early. Now, not the end of the world, but you're certainly cutting it shorter than you could be if you use your little finger to catch the B minor. So again, these finger markings for your left hand, I think that's important. That's certainly in the music there, next to each of the notes in the standard notation. Now moving on, let's have a look at this third measure. The third measure, we've got our first finger up, covering this E minor position, second finger. Third finger comes in for the D position. And again, just alternating those fingers, index and middle, for the melody. So one to the next, to the next, to the next. Sometimes it's a little tricky because you have groupings of 3 being in 6/8 time. So sometimes you might double up on a note for convenience of the same finger, but experiment with that yourself. There is no hard and fast rule here. There are several ways of going about it, but just that idea of alternating works okay. All right, measure 4. Let's talk about the fingering here, because we've come out of the D position in measure 3. Third finger is busy. We're going to quickly jump across to that little finger. Now, this one could go either way. If you want to play it with a first and third, great. If you want to go first and fourth, like I have been, that's great too. As long as you can get to that chord, that's a bit of a tricky one to come out of the D. Then out of this A position, back to the first finger there, setting us up for the melody on the next part. So that's a little unorthodox. So coming out a second finger on the E, first finger to the A, setting ourselves up for the next position that we have, which is a repeat of the first 4 bars almost. So let's just summarize very quickly. Hand position, you do need to have that thumb lower behind the neck with your wrist down. See how my wrist down, but I'm also bringing it forward of the neck slightly, particularly on the chord, like that big G stretch. It just really helps to clear those strings and get onto those fingertips and not pull down on the strings and all those important things. So wrist position, thumb position play a big part of that. In terms of finger choice, it is in the tablature there or in the notation, so do keep an eye on that. There are certainly options at places, but if you stick pretty close to that, you'll go okay with the fingers. The right hand, thumb on those lower voice notes, stem down. Fingers on the upper voice notes, the melody. So that's index and middle perhaps, and just alternating those either with a rest stroke or a free stroke or a combination of. When those notes get pretty close together, you can't play a free stroke like in measure 4. You can't play a rest stroke, you've got to play a free stroke there. Okay, just moving on, let's have a look at measure 5. It's exactly the same as measure 1. Into measure 6, same as measure 2. Measure 7 is like measure 3. And the final measure before the repeat. So again, a really strong hand position needed here, little finger. So we can reach back and get that pull off. Third finger, catching the C sharp. Resolving to the 2 open Ds there. We'll repeat this part of the tune twice as we do part B, so take your time. Even though it's a slower tempo tune, it is quite challenging for the left hand. So really work on those positions we were mentioning earlier. You really want to work on that technique. And if you're not really familiar with that position, this tune is certainly more advanced. So if you're not used to that hand position yet, it might be a bit tricky, but if you wanted to give it a go, just remember these couple of points. Thumb lower behind the neck. Don't have your thumb up too high. Bring your wrist down, nice and square, but then forward slightly so you can really stretch out those fingers. It's a very, what you'd consider classical guitar position you really need for these chords. And the reason for that is in a lot of classical guitar, you do have these really big stretches, and this is just as appropriate here. There's a very classical feel to it, this piece anyway. Okay, hope you've enjoyed this so far, because this is a great tune. When you head to pickinglessons.com, in the members section there, you'll have part B of this lesson. We'll break that down. And then you'll also get the tablature there and a play along track you can download. So pickinglessons.com, I'll see you there.